Right, good morning everyone. My name's Guy Hammersley. I'm an Executive Director here at BRE. I'm also the BRE Group Director responsible for all of the BIM related activities at BRE. And it's my really great pleasure to welcome you all here today on behalf of BRE, on behalf of BuildingSMART UK and Ireland, and also our headline sponsor Viewpoint for BIM Prospects. So, our conference, it's here. The media has been full of it for several weeks, hasn't it? The comments have been interesting. I've heard words like momentous. Magic will happen. Nothing will happen. It's already happened. Those are just a flavour of the few things I picked out just in the last 3 days. So the timing of our conference is no surprise. This is quite deliberate because what we want to do is use this as an opportunity to get underneath all the hype and the fiction and understand, where are we? You know, what are the facts? How is it going? Where are we at the moment? What are the gaps? What do we still need to do? What action should we all collectively take over the next weeks and months? So it's a great opportunity we have between us for the next 2 days to do something about that. You know, as an industry, I reflect we're often very hard on ourselves. When a new challenge comes up or a new opportunity comes up, we do tend to beat ourselves up a bit. Those of you who've been in the industry a while, I'm sure will reflect on that. I've just been working out, this is my 40th year in our industry, and looking back over all of those years, yeah, we do tend to be rather tough on ourselves, but you just walk around our great cities and have a look at that cityscape. There's some really amazing buildings that we have delivered, some really amazing infrastructure. Just look at some of the articles in the construction press. So when I reflect on that, and I reflect on BIM, here's a few of my own personal thoughts, just to kick the day off. And I should perhaps say, I'm not standing here as somebody who would even pretend to be a technical BIM expert. I see myself as a construction professional and a businessman who's looking at BIM through those eyes and seeing what the benefits might be. So first of all, I don't see this as something that's just happened or about to happen. For me, I see this as a journey that's been going on for a very long time. I mean, my earliest discussions about what we now call BIM, I remember in my days at John Laing back in the 1980s and the very early 80s. I see the huge benefits that are potentially there, but that are already being found and won by a number of organisations, clients and supply chain organisations. And you know, all of this is happening hand in hand with this digital revolution that we're going through. So it is actually going to happen. I was reminded the other day of one of my favourite strap lines from the 1990s. I think it came from the DTI, which was innovate or liquidate. And I think that's something worth reflecting on, because we're not going to stop the digital revolution, and why should we? Because this is bringing us huge benefits. So, leaving you with those thoughts, we have this opportunity now, an opportunity that's being brought to us thanks to the wonderful collection of speakers that we've got together, reflecting many different aspects of our industry and of the client base. So, a big thank you to all of you who are speaking here today. I'd also like to thank BuildingSMART UK and Ireland and our headline sponsors Viewpoint, and also all of our other sponsors who are exhibiting outside in the refreshment area. Do take the trouble to go and engage with them, have a look at the demonstrations and to network. And I'd also like to thank all of you for coming. And I really hope you get something out of today. But that means please really do engage. Get stuck into the debates, into the discussions, into the networking. Don't turn off your mobile phones. I mean, put them on silent, please, but, you know, we encourage you to tweet and to blog your way through the next 2 days. For those of you who find the lectures, the discussion, the networking not enough, you can stay behind tomorrow and take an exam as well. which is brought to you by the BRE Academy, and is at, I think, 4 o'clock, is that correct? Looking at Pauline, 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. And also there is a tour of the Innovation Park here. So lots to do and lots happening. So, thank you all very much again. I'm now going to start the proceedings, and I'm going to invite our keynote speaker to the stage, Professor Jeremy Watson. Jeremy has many roles. He is the Chief Scientist and Engineer here at BRE. He's also Vice Dean of Engineering at University College London. He is Chairman of BuildingSMART UK and Ireland, and in October he's going to become the new President of the IET, and that's only just scratching the surface. So, Jeremy, please do get us started on our journey.
Thank you, Guy. Always a hard act to follow after the trailer, I find. Just because I say yes too often, maybe. So, hopefully the system will work so that I can, yeah, great. So I think it's appropriate in a keynote to sort of just revisit some of the issues, isn't it, just to set the scene for the day. So a lot of you will have seen a lot of this material. First of all, we realise that construction is a massive industry in the UK, perhaps underrepresented in terms of government interest, although of course the BIM mandate does illustrate the importance that is seen in the industry, and indeed the savings in productivity and not only in capex but also in operational expenditure that will come through ultimately. So 2.9 million people employed in the construction industry, about 10% of all jobs in over 280,000 businesses. And I think in a piece associated with David Jelling's very interesting talk about skills later on this morning, I've got a follow-on commentary on that where we can see some of the breakdown of the demography of that industry, and it's very surprising that it's very fragmented, as you can see, and an industry represented by SMEs, really. So the UK industrial strategy included the construction strategy, and it was aiming to get lower costs, as we can see here, faster delivery, it's all about the capital piece of it, lower emissions in the process of construction, and improvement in exports. And then as we extrapolate forward into BIM Level 3, Digital Built Britain, which I'll talk about in a minute, we see further benefits through the operational savings in those buildings. So it's a very exciting integrated package moving us forward. Again, this is, for those who haven't seen this, almost everyone will have done, a very useful diagram that came out quite early on in the thinking about BIM. So the first thing to say is it's not just CAD. Of course we know that, everyone who's come here today, and it's evolved through what I like to call feral BIM, in other words, BIM in the wild, people doing it different ways. I used to work for a company who, even in their different offices, I won't name the company, but many of you know who that is, do it in different ways. And that's fine, because at the end, in those days, it was driven by the process, it was driven by the deliverer rather than by the customer, by the client. And nowadays, I think we've got much more client focus. We want benefits for the client, we want savings, we want efficiencies for them. And that led to a very, very cogent argument, which I'll talk about in terms of the timeline, because I think the history of this, it's momentous enough to think about the history of how this came about, with a view to how further things will come about. So I used to be a chief scientific advisor in government in DCLG, and so I got understanding of how politicians and officials interact. And to actually get politicians interested in things, you have to have a very simple argument. And it typically has to be about money, or about jobs, or about, these days, of course, productivity. But the people around that time, Paul Morell and then Mark Bew, actually had the energy and the strength and clarity of articulation to get Mark Prisk and Oliver Letwin behind this. And that really led to the BIM Level 2 process, which I'll talk about a little bit further on. And then just to give a glimpse of the future, Level 3 BIM, what does it mean? It means various things for various people. Are there different levels of Level 2, for example, that lead to that? But I've got a view around that which is led by my technical interests in the Internet of Things, which I hope I can unpack that a little bit for you as well. So the key milestones that came out, and these I asked Paul actually to put down what he thought were the key milestones. I mentioned Paul Morell, the first chief construction advisor. Sadly, we don't have a chief construction advisor now, but I think that was a very important role. Did a lot for us actually in getting visibility of the industry. particularly in Cabinet Office, right at the highest levels. Paul, of course, an absolutely excellent ambassador for our industry. We had the benefit of Mark Bew, who, as many of you will know, is a very energetic, clear-thinking, motivated person who took that forward into the BIM Level 2 activity. And the task group was set up to implement that. Core team funded and mobilised to work on the publicly available standard 1192 from BSI, which was very valuable, gave us a framework. And core government departments were set up to share information to support the industry change. And then also, Mark has been very active in the mobilisation of the EU BIM task group. And in fact, last week, Enbury came here. Guy hosted them. I was there. So the European Network of Building Research Institutes, I remembered the acronym, and they were talking, they look very much to the UK as a thought leader in this area, which is great to hear. And I think we've got to stay ahead of the game. I think we're up for that. And then, of course, we Digital Built Britain. Some of you will have seen the work towards BIM Level 3 was announced in the budget just a few weeks ago. And the handover for BIM Level 2 for Digital Built Britain is complete from government and into industry is underway, including the training of government departments. This is a timeline I put together. I'm sure I'll have missed a few things, but the two yellow stars for me are the key points. You know, the appointment of Paul Morell, the Chief Construction Advisor, which actually gave the focus, the convergence of thinking, which I think is absolutely key. It's a typical British thing and maybe a human thing to have lots of different channels all thinking the same thing, but nothing much happens because you don't have sufficient intensity of thought to make things happen. But he did that with Mark. So we had the precursor stuff, which we know, which identified inefficiencies in the industry and what might be done. And then some of the points we talked earlier on. The strategy was evolved. Roughly, this is an accurate timeline by year. PAS 1192 Part 2, which is the sort of core framework, was published. Digital Built Britain was published around then, and my colleague Tim Royd, professor from UCL and the Bartlett School, led that. I worked with him on the technical side of that with some other colleagues. Very interesting piece of thought leadership type work. There's a publication available on that. I also worked on this with the security services, and I think it's worth just having a little segue into that. So there's real concern about my feral BIM leading to people using CAD and the next stages from CAD actually publishing potentially sensitive stuff on the web. And a major, I won't name the particular project, but a major project in London was taken as an instance where, for example, you know, if you're a person of malintent, intending to harm infrastructure, you might go in there typically in the past with a camera and take pictures of things and decide what you might or might not do. The trouble was here, you could go onto the web and just look at the detailed CAD drawings, including service ducts, access doors, wiring and so on. Very, very dangerous situation. So 1192 was put in place. You might say the stable door being closed after the horse was bolted, but it was only a few horses, I think, and we are now in the right place for that. And BIM Level 3, Digital Built Britain, is going to take a much more careful view of security. I did take a couple of other views of timelines. I won't go into great detail here, being aware of the time, but I would commend to you a lady called Beth Morgan. I don't know whether any of you remember her from the National Platform for the Built, I think, and Constructing Excellence. So she was on the administration team, and as a relatively young, mature PhD student, she's just finished her PhD again at UCL, and she's been interested in the cultural aspects of getting BIM into a company, and what does that do in terms of how people work inside the company and down the supply chain. So when that PhD is published, and this is an extract from it, which is rather more detailed than my timeline, I would commend you to have a look at that. So that will be openly available, presumably from UCL when that's published. So there are some interesting aspects here about going right back to the early days when the feral BIM was being used in early days, and also taking into account the building energy type work here, and so on, and the duration of the BIM task group. So a slide I stole with acknowledgement from BBRI, the Belgian Building Research Institute, which I think we liked, didn't we, Guy? Yeah, showed us to be ahead of the game. So the Europeans reckon, and quite correctly, that we are in a pretty good place. Those of you who can read French, don't need me to translate it. But you can see all the purple areas are where people are kind of ahead of the game. And overall, UK is doing extremely well in the sort of public building type aspect. So this is commercial offices, obviously, institutional buildings, hospital, education, and public buildings generally. So they were very positive about what we did, and they were listening carefully. They're also doing some really good stuff, particularly around standards. but we must keep our eye on the ball, I think, particularly if we're going to take advantage of the commercial opportunity of selling into Europe. So let's hope the right decision's made in the summer. The landscape for BIM in the UK then, so we're aware it's already happened, centrally procured projects require building information modelling. PASA Limited 92 is the route to compliance, as we've said. There's a major challenge and an opportunity for us that will pave the way for improvements across the industry, and not just ultimately in building and construction in the OPEX piece, but in the CAPEX piece, capital expenditure, but in operational expenditure, and ultimately across the whole total expenditure, TOTEX piece. BuildingSMART, of which I'm chair, has been very effective in a very pragmatic way, in a formative way, through a collection of experts who've got together through common interests. It's been really a group that's drawn just by the interest rather than by a formal organisation. And we're now trying to formalise that organisation a bit more to give us some industry leadership that's visible and audible to the industry at large. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So we have been doing all the good things. We've been working with government industry. We've been working with BuildingSMART International, which is particularly active internationally on standards and is led by Richard Petrie. And so we've been doing a complementary piece for the local aspect of the market in the UK. So just in brief, those are the reports. I won't talk about them in detail. I mentioned the security one, which is relatively new. And of course, part two is the original document. So switching just to thinking about BuildingSMART UK and Ireland, what we really want to do is to catalyse the market, to uplift and to maximally benefit from the large-scale adoption of BIM. And we very much believe in open standards, so we really would like, rather like the Linux model, if you like, for software developers, to make it possible for small companies in the sort of CAD world and the building information modelling world to join up with a core entity, which is the sort of established tool set for BIM, to create much greater market opportunity. And future-proofing, I think, is really key as well. So we're not all locked into one CAD platform, but we can actually move forward, we can bolt on. We'll create a bigger market for those CAD vendors. So, okay, they might not get 80% of it, they might get sort of 50% of it, but it might be 3 times bigger. So at the end of the day, there's more for all. So creating a vibrant domestic and international business based on expertise includes consultancy. Of course, BRE is very interested and active and effective in both providing detailed and strategic information on BIM, but also training in a very effective way. And we're one of the very few training providers actually at the level that we're operating. And we believe that BIM should be deployed under that philosophy of openness. I've mentioned that already, data exchange and quality, integrity and trust, so that people can feel this is a good methodology. It's established against standards. It's moving forward, but I know that my investment in it will hold for a useful period. So the mission for BS UK are these. So creating an environment that creates the value, providing collaboration with interests across the whole supply chain, including architects, engineers, constructors, etc. And increasingly and interestingly, I think FM. So FM will turn into smart FM with the advent of Digital Built Britain. Very, very exciting, brand new market sector, managing buildings remotely and doing much, much more with buildings than we've ever been able to do before. We want to promote competency, of course, and that's where organisations like BRE can provide qualification and accreditation, and connecting internationally, as we say, with not just BuildingSMART International, but with all other international organisations that are working on building information modelling. So we came from being an active interest group, promoting the mission, and we're moving towards something that's a little bit more formal. We had early engagement with the UK task group, and the context, the world in which we work is BuildingSMART International, BRE, and through the BIM 4 and the communities of BIM locally as well. And we look forward to delivering more in those areas. I mentioned a structure. This is kind of partly aspirational, partly as it is at the moment. So we have what I've called a governing board. We're not quite that yet. We are, if you like, an interest group with experts as well. We have a technical advisory group and a user group. And BRE, through colleagues here, Paul Oakley particularly, is leading on the secretariat work in an invaluable way, providing a home really for BuildingSMART International. And then we have links into the BIM 4 groups, into the different subject areas, and also the links, I suppose, via BuildingSMART International into the BIM rooms, like, for example, the product room, which I think Paul Local is on, infrastructure and so on. We're interested in delivery and in obviously linking with government to make sure that particularly government departments know how to procure against BIM. So that's not an obvious thing necessarily. They know something a bit more than just the word. Current actions, communications and engagement, government support and international collaboration, and because time is running short, I won't dwell on things too long. Future roles, I think increasing that socialisation of BIM, getting that across the patch. You'll see again in David Jelling's presentation later and mine, which follows on, that people kind of think they're largely there, but I think there may be some misapprehensions in terms of understanding the detail of executing BIM. There's a real need to do the training and qualification, and there's an exciting aspect of connecting with research to promote the future BIM Level 3 work. Now, I think at this point I have to sort of wear my sort of ex-government hat, and taking what Mark Bew would say, if he were here, I think he'd say, well, Level 2 is here for a long period, so don't assume there's anything volatile about Level 2. Level 2 is what we're going to be using, but this is going to be coming up in maybe a decade's time or so, and we'll have a future-proof way of transitioning into it. So I'm going to say a few words about what has been called Level 3, which Tim and I worked on, and which is now really called Digital Built Britain, because in a way BIM is too small a word for it. So that will seek to support dynamic data, in other words, real-time data from real variables that are derived from within the building, and that's where the link with Internet of Things comes in. So you can imagine wireless sensors throughout. If I've got a CAD drawing, to take a particular instance, and I'm an FM person, I can drill down through the CAD pictures and actually look at live values in particular things like a fan coil, unit temperature, motor bearing, vibration, whatever it might be. So I can start to have thinking around when maintenance might be required. So preventative maintenance rather than scheduled maintenance, I think, is one of the greatest cost-saving aspects. And if you want to look at where this has been deployed really well already, look at Rolls-Royce, look at aero engines. When we fly in an aircraft, those engines are sold as a service to the airline, not as a product. And Rolls-Royce makes sure that they know, as the aircraft's flying, what the engine state is. So when the aircraft lands, if it needs spares, the spares are there already. They can be swapped out. Really exciting stuff. Embedding transactional information about business, including live information. I've mentioned total expenditure, optimizing that, integrating tools. This is a big challenge because you've got to integrate real-time control tools now with CAD and SCADA. Cybersecurity, can't overemphasize, and new business models, particularly around smart facilities management. I'm going to move on a little bit more quickly because there's a lot that I've had to say. So combining static data with dynamic values I've mentioned, allowing third-party real-time analytics, so we think about big data, stuff in the cloud. We've got to make it trustworthy, of course. We've got to link it with the Internet of Things type technologies, but it will mean whole new business areas will open up to warrant, if you like, the building performance in the future. And that will make raising finance more straightforward as well. And I've had some conversations with banks about that, and they're looking for this sort of effect. But we have to be careful because effector controls, in other words, things you can operate remotely like lift doors, access, air conditioning, chiller room controls, will be potentially supported by key access remotely, and that gives rise to some cybersecurity concerns. I'm going to skip through these diagrams a little bit. So some of these, what I call the Toblerone diagrams that Mark Bew evolved. This is really the level 2 stuff, and then when you start to operate things, you get interested in the operational processing. And as you design the system, so there are, rather like the V diagram in the software world, you've actually designed the way you're going to monitor things in the real-time world. And you can build statistical process control loops to improve the process as you go on. In fact, it's this way. So what you learn from the operation, you can build into the new designs of new buildings, etc., going forward. Very recently, with my UCL hat on, I won a £23 million grant for looking at Internet of Things cybersecurity, and this fits very nicely into BIM Level 3. We've got 60 partners, and we're looking at things and concerns around this sort of aspect. This is an Intel diagram. This is a domestic system, so increasingly we're going to have wireless sensors everywhere, and there's the opportunity potentially of hacking at a variety of levels, so we need to be very careful about cybersecurity. But Internet of Things will play a key role, obviously, in Digital Built Britain, providing the sensors. I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I guess the slide set will be available afterwards. Things we're concerned about, information theft, I think particularly perturbation of operation. if you imagine an ex-employee, say, it could be, it's not necessarily a national security issue, hacks into a company's server room chillers, within half an hour you can shut down the business. And typically BMS, building management systems, are not very secure. In fact, IBM have got what they call their ethical hacking team, and they took it upon themselves to do a blind test with an accepting client to actually hack into their building management system. They not only hacked into the building management system very easily because of poor password hygiene, they also went through the building management system into the enterprise and got access to the business information as well, because the installer had thought, it's convenient to actually connect the two together. So we need to be very mindful of that. So we're going towards a smart world. It's a very complex world that will cover not just buildings but also other sectors, and I think the next one that will be really interesting is infrastructure generally. So linear assets like roads and rails already are quite sophisticated, and taking a business model that joins up the operation with the capital expenditure, and actually instrumentation and integration is happening in an ad hoc way, but it's not according to standards, it's not according to BIM level 3. We had another slide which I know Guy liked a lot from BBRI, from Johan last week. Again, this is something you can reflect on, his multidimensional way of looking at the BIM landscape. So we're aiming for competitiveness and value for customers, but there are all sorts of intersections of thinking and business opportunity that we need to look at to get there. And I think I've almost kept the time. That's my keynote. Thank you very much.